before we talk about Spitfires, this table, I noticed that it is magnificent. Tell me a little about how this came to the office.
So this was a complete surprise for me. One of our squadrons, 65 Squadron, the Air Base Reconstruction and Recovery Squadron, and they, for the centenary, they made this table out of blackbutt timber. They put it through a laser milling machine, and we were able to produce the Royal Australian Air Force crest that you can see on the table here. And they sent me out of the office just immediately prior to the 100th birthday on the 31st of March.
There aren't many people, Mel, who can send the chief out of the office.
No, that's right. Well, my staff out here can. So they told me how to work from home that day. There were a few things that they needed to get done. When I returned to the office the next day, there was a group of the technicians, the tradesmen that built this table. They were all in here, and they'd carried the table up. It weighs a tonne, but it's absolutely beautiful quality. And for that, the quality, the intent of the table to be delivered by our Air Force people, just a great demonstration of what our people in our Air Force have been doing for many, many years. And the work they've done now represents a table that will take our Air Force in the office of the Chief of Air Force through into our second century.
So this is the 100-year table that will last in this office for another 100 years at least.
That's right.
That's remarkable.
That's the plan.
It's beauty and the beauty of the work. When I came in, I looked at it and I thought, well, in many ways this represents some of what the Spitfire is about. I mean, you look at that aeroplane and it is, for something that was designed to be so deadly, to allow our young men to dispatch their young men more effectively than they could the other way around. Today we think about the Spitfire as something beautiful, but in that beauty, it served so many purposes, and that I think carries forward to the Air Force today, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think certainly the Spitfire to me is one of the most elegant and beautiful airframes. I mean, I'm a fighter pilot, so I love fighter aircraft. I did have a model of a Lancaster in my bedroom when I was growing up. But the Spitfire, nimble, agile, fast, a dynamic performer, a true fighter. Now, I've had the privilege of flying a Mustang, and the Mustang's, it's rock solid. You can tell you're flying a fighter when you're flying the Mustang. I haven't flown the Spitfire, but I imagine that it's just that little bit more nimble, a bit more flighty. So quite a remarkable aeroplane at a really important point of innovation. Born of war, and up against an adversary. The Messerschmitt ME-109, I think, was it's one of its primary adversaries, and the technology that the Germans put into that aeroplane was quite phenomenal as well. Yes. But between the two of those, we had just amazing aircraft, and the Spitfire held its own well and truly in that regard.
It did, and it held its own from well before the war till well after the war. The flexibility of that aircraft and the ability to, I think, have more than 30 versions of a single aeroplane. In that way, it stands on its own. I don't think any aeroplane has had that many versions of of that same airframe. That flexibility, that remarkable aeroplane let it take on many roles, and in that way is a lot like the F-35 Lightning II today. People think about the Spitfire, as you say, as a fighter. My father, who was a Royal Australian Air Force Spitfire pilot, flew them as a dive bomber predominantly. Yeah. No one thinks about the Spitfire as a dive bomber or something that will strafe targets or do photo reconnaissance. They think about the Spitfire as a fighter interceptor, but it did all of those things. I think, remarkably well, and I think it's that corollary to the Spitfire of yesteryear that is today very much what the Royal Australian Air Force does and continues to do with the F-35.
Yeah, and we can probably talk a bit about the F-35 a bit later if you like, but the way the Spitfire was developed and truly innovated all through its life of type, and as you say, multi-role. I think strafing targets on the ground, and it was very, very, very effective in that sort of a role. And there's some similarities between what it represented and what the F-35 now represents. Although I think the Spitfire is a far more attractive aircraft than the F-35. But you can see that in a short space of our history of aviation, 100 years of Air Force this year, just over, a few years over 100 years of military aviation. Our Air Force was formed right at the start of the development of air power to provide a military application. So the Spitfire developed not very long after we first started flying aeroplanes. And when you look back now at the Spitfire and the technology in that aeroplane and compare that through to what we now operate with an F-35, another 70 odd years later, the technology is amazing in terms of its movement forward. In the 100 years of military aviation, we've gone from fabric and spruce wood through to millions of lines of code and carbon fibre and advanced manufacturing technologies. But when you look at the Spitfire, you can see the nature of people and what they can bring and how they can think and find a solution to a problem. And that's alive and well in our Air Force today, and it's our forebears that have really given us that from the start.